What's going on, you guys? So it's been a little bit since I posted any videos, and that's partly due to because there really hasn't been too much going on in the sport of boxing. I mean, we're a little over a month out from when Canelo Crawford happened, and that was the biggest fight of the year. There was a lot of buzz going on around that fight. Really, since then, there hasn't been too many more, big fights of that level, right? Coming up next month, you got, Benavidez taking on Yard and Haney taking on Norman, and along with a couple other good fights on that card as well. So that's the next, big event. But just this last weekend, I guess we had Jaron Ennis taking on Lima, so that's really what's been going on in the sport of boxing. Not a whole lot, but what I wanted to get on here and talk about was, Jaron Ennis, and his last performance, and then this, narrative or this notion that, he's on the same level of a Terence Crawford, or, they're similar and he's the next Terence Crawford and things like that, which we've heard for, quite a while now. But going into the fight, I thought Jaron Ennis looked good. You got to keep in mind that the opponent that he was in there with, wasn't a elite level 154 pounder. I understand it was his debut at the division and things like that, but I was expecting him to, either go in there with a champion or, at least a high level contender, or, maybe even a former champion, right? These are the type of fights that you usually see when you got guys that are champions in the division below. Most of the time you see them just go straight to a division and fight the champion. I mean, that's what you've seen Terence Crawford do. Really, that's what you've seen Devin Haney do, both at 140, and now he's taking on Brian Norman Jr. for his first fight at 147, right? There's a list of fighters that you can look up that when they moved up in divisions, they went straight for the champion, but obviously Boots didn't do that, and that's part of the reason that there has been some criticism of Jaron Ennis, right? But on the other hand, people are also praising this performance, right? And I'm not saying he didn't look good in the ring against Lima. The only thing that negative I'd have to say about that is, who is Lima? What has Lima done? Lima was honestly a bum. He looked horrible in some of the other fights I had seen from him, right? I know if you look at his record, and you look at the physique of a Lima, you would just automatically assume that this guy is very quality level fighter, right? He's a high level fighter, but really, I mean, modern day boxing, fighters are able to pat their records, and have an amazing record with a lot of fights, but really they haven't fought nobody, right? And that's kind of where Jaron Ennis is at. But a lot of people have come out now and said, oh, well, he is the next Terence Crawford. He is the guy to beat Terence Crawford, and the comparisons really stem from just the ability to switch from southpaw to orthodox, right? Aside from that, you don't really see too many similarities, right? I mean, I think as far as boxing skill and boxing IQ, I think Terence Crawford is levels above a Jaron Ennis. I do think Jaron Ennis, from the eye test and everything we've seen from him thus far, he definitely is elite. His skill set is elite. But we just haven't seen him in there with other elite fighters, right? Who knows that when he gets to, the time where he is in the ring with some of these elite guys, that, he's able to look as dominant as he has before. That's the biggest question. But what I recently saw was an interview on Mill City, Boxing's podcast, and he had Breadman Edwards on there, right? Trainer of Caleb Plant and, a plethora of other fighters and things like that. Breadman often, gets credited for having this like amazing, boxing IQ and just like this, boxing pundit, he's regarded as one of the better or the best minds in the sport of boxing. But there's often times where I find myself, as of recently, totally disagreeing with a lot of the stuff he says. And really, this all has came from Terence Crawford, and his fight with Canelo, and then with these comparisons of Jaron Boots Ennis and Terence Crawford. On the interview I watched, he said Jaron Boots Ennis, at age 28 or 29, however old he is on the same level of Terence Crawford when he was 28 or 29, right? Or they're super close. They're pretty much the same. And I totally disagree with that, man. When you look at Terence Crawford when he was 28 or 29 years old, he was already a 2-division champ. He had already went undisputed at 140 pounds. And some of the fighters that were on his resume were elite or very good wins, right? At 135, he beat Ricky Burns, and a lot of people bash on Ricky Burns. The dude is a 3-division champion. You can't knock him and say he's a bum or he's a nobody if you're a 3-division champion, right? He had Ricky Burns on there, who he won the title from. He fought Gamboa, who was a top 10 pound-for-pound fighter at the time they fought, right? Then you move up to 140. He went undisputed there and beat the likes of Victor Postal, who was elite at that time. He was undefeated champion. He had beat Lucas Matisse, who was a monster. And not only did he beat him, I think he stopped him, right? And he was probably one of the more feared fighters really in all of boxing at that time. He had guys like Danny Garcia not wanting to fight him. Danny Garcia ducked to Victor Postal. So Victor Postal was a great win. Ndongo was a unified champion. People like to bash on Ndongo and things like that, but you got to look at what he did, at that time. I'm not saying Ndongo was a Hall of Fame fighter, but you have to give him credit if you're a unified champion, right? Because he didn't not only just, get titles, he actually beat the guys for the titles. He didn't get elevated, a belt like Jaron Boots Ennis did, right? Or some of the other guys, that we've seen, over these recent years that have just got elevated a title, like Stan Jonas. None of these guys have fought for the titles, but they get rewarded them. Nonetheless, Felix Diaz was another great quality win at 140 pounds. Felix Diaz was a former Olympic gold medalist. At the time that he had fought Crawford, he had only one loss to Lamont Peterson, and that was a controversial loss. A lot of people thought he beat Lamont Peterson, right? But he was a guy that had a lot of promise, and a lot of people saw a bright future for Felix Diaz in the sport of boxing. Unfortunately, I think Terence Crawford really ruined this dude's career, but there was names on Terence Crawford's resume when he was 28, 29 years old, and he had accomplished a lot more than what Jaron Boots Ennis has accomplished, right? So I don't understand how Breadman can say they're the same level, or they're pretty much the same at the ages that they're at, meaning both at 28, 29 years old. I think Crawford is levels above him, man. And I don't really understand why they... I guess I do understand. What I was going to say is I don't understand why they, continue to compare, Crawford and Boots, but in reality, it's just to promote a Jaron Boots Ennis, right? You got to think about it. Like, Jaron Boots Ennis' name has been tied to Terence Crawford for his whole entire career. Part of the reason, if not the main reason, Jaron Boots Ennis is as popular as he is because a lot of people have compared the two, or put Jaron Boots Ennis and Terence Crawford in a, future fight and things like that. They think that Jaron Boots Ennis is that guy, and a lot of that happened because, Earl Spence got destroyed by Terence Crawford, and they were just trying to find the next best thing to, beat Crawford. And the thing is, too, when it comes to the, the fight that supposedly, should have happened, there's always narratives of each person ducked the other and things like that. But if I recall correctly, when Terence Crawford fought David Avanesian, they had went through multiple guys within the sanctioning body to schedule a fight for Terence Crawford, right? This was when negotiations failed with Earl Spence. But Jaron Boots Ennis was offered a fight. He was a fighter that wasn't signed to PBC, but he had you know, his television rights, you know, were to Showtime. So every one of his fights were aired on Showtime. But he wasn't a PBC fighter, but he was offered the fight to fight Crawford on BLK Prime. And for whatever reason, they turned it down because they wanted to pledge loyalty or, you know, stick with Showtime because, you know, that's who they had television rights, you know, to, so on and so forth. I don't get too much into the business, but when you hear things like, oh, well, Jaron Boots Ennis never got the opportunity to fight Crawford and he moved up out of the division, this, that, and the other, you know, you hear stuff like that, and then you see what happened at that time. It's just complete BS, right? Jaron Boots Ennis didn't want to take the fight for whatever reason. You got to think about it logically here. Jaron Boots Ennis was probably what? He's 28 now. Crawford was 34, 35. So, I mean, Jaron Boots Ennis was like 24, 25 years old. Maybe it'd been too early for him to get in the ring with Terence Crawford at that moment, right? But then you hear stuff like Jaron Boots Ennis, you know, in the locker room with Eddie Hearn, and Eddie Hearn saying, we're going to unify at 154, we're going to go undisputed, we're going to go to 160, unify there, and we're going to go to 68, and if that guy's still hanging around, then we're going to take him out too. And then you see Boots say, oh yeah, he's in my way. So it's just they constantly tie their name to Terence Crawford. And it's obviously to boost the fighter up, to promote Jaron Boots Ennis. But I'm just getting sick of seeing the comparison between the two, because if you look at Jaron Boots Ennis, I went through Crawford's, you know, accolades, but Jaron Boots Ennis hasn't accomplished anything close to what Terence Crawford has accomplished. Terence Crawford had to fight for every single belt that he got. Whether if it was a vacant title that he fought for, he did that. He didn't never just get elevated a belt. That didn't happen. And when Crawford was a champion, there really wasn't a list of fights or fighters that were calling him out at the divisions, right? When Crawford was at 147, he cleaned the whole entire division out. He knocked out everybody that he fought at welterweight, and he collected all the belts. Right, Jaron Boots Ennis, he unified a belt, or he unified 2 belts. But when you have Teofimo Lopez, Brian Norman Jr., Devin Haney, all in that division calling you out, and you turn down 3 major fights, and then your first fight to 154, you're offered to fight Virgil Ortiz, and you turn that fight down too. When have you ever heard Crawford turning down 4 big names within the sport in 1 calendar year? That just doesn't happen. You've never heard that because it's never happened. So it just gets old. You know, I'm getting tired of hearing, oh, Jaron Boots Ennis is, you know, the next Terence Crawford, or he's the guy to beat Terence Crawford. You had the opportunity to fight him before in the past, and you turned it down. And as far as accomplishments go, you're not on Terence Crawford's level, even for the age that you were. Terence Crawford at 28, 29 years old versus Jaron Boots Ennis at 28, 29 years old. It's not even close. It's not a comparison. Accomplishments-wise, it's not even close. But those are my thoughts, man. Let me know what you guys think. Where do you guys see this argument? Are you on the side of thinking that Jaron Boots Ennis is on Terence Crawford's level? You know, or you could say, does he have the potential to be on Terence Crawford's level? Let me know. Hate, like, comment, subscribe.